Good morning. Just a few weeks ago, actually in February, I had the pleasure as the new Commissioner for Employment to announce the highest level in employment in Europe and a constant fall in unemployment. Vice President Dombrovskis already recalled these figures. Just a few months after today, Europe is facing a very massive and huge increase in unemployment. And as has been pointed out by Paolo Gentiloni, there is a risk of fragmentation not only in our countries but also in our societies, because this crisis strikes certain sectors more than others, strikes certain jobs more than others, and strikes certain companies more than others. And so there is a risk that this economic crisis will become a social crisis. That is a real threat. And so we need to combat unemployment. And that is something that should be our main priority. We need to save jobs. How to do that? And the Commissioner Gentiloni, made a reference to the SURE instrument and the implementation of partial unemployment, which has been adopted basically by all EU member states. And the SURE instrument was adopted yesterday, and we want to implement this as quickly as possible, allowing countries to avail themselves of this type of financing. More than 30 million, you must know this, more than 30 million persons are on temporary or partial unemployment. And if we didn't have this partial unemployment instrument, what would that do for unemployment? Just look at the United States. The United States has seen explosive unemployment figures in that country, with more than 30 million unemployed. And what we should be concerned about is youth unemployment. Because this crisis, as I stated, is not something that hits people equally. This strikes young people much more than others. These are young people who are in employment situations that are not as safe. They're more precarious. And also young people who are just coming onto the working labor market. And so for the Commission, it's very important to tackle the increase in youth unemployment. And I've seen that in certain countries, we see that rise in youth unemployment, where about 50% of young people are unemployed. And so this is a situation that is similar or maybe even worse than what we saw in the previous crisis. And so we cannot accept a second generation to be sacrificed. And we will be presenting in the coming weeks a package to combat youth unemployment, specifically with a youth guarantee, which is beefed up. But alongside young people, there are two other categories of vulnerable people who are suffering through this crisis. These are migrants. They have difficulties entering the labor market, even if they do have the right. These are people who, and then there are people who have handicaps. They're also suffering more. We also see certain communities, such as the Roma, which are also hugely impacted by this crisis. So our recommendations reflect these social difficulties, and this is something that we see from a vantage point of the recovery of the economy, which should really champion inclusion and economic conversion, which is central, and also social convergence, upward convergence. And so this is a part and parcel of the response that we will be giving to create recovery. We need to preserve and create jobs, and we need to support workers, especially with regard to income, partial unemployment is a good solution, but we also need to take into consideration those who cannot benefit from partial unemployment, people who have lost their jobs and who don't even get any type of unemployment benefits, for example, the self-employed. These are people who are very affected by this crisis. And so we need to take a look at how our social protection systems are working, and we need to see how these systems can be inclusive. Are they inclusive enough? In the previous commission, we had adopted a recommendation on social protection recommendations, and I think it's time to see how that social protection covers categories which very often do not benefit from these types of instruments. And so these recommendations are also hallmarked by the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And I believe that one of the conclusions that we can draw from the crisis is that the states in Europe that have social protection systems which are robust protect their citizens better, and they protect them better in terms of health protection as well. Health is part of the recommendations of the scoreboard, and I think we've seen how our health systems in almost all member states have been put through their paces. And we have seen how the system has had to adapt itself to the major challenge of the COVID-19. And we see that the needs in terms of investments in our health systems are more necessary than ever. The needs for professionals in the health sector are alarming in many member states. Many member states have had to really put out a huge deployment given the vertiginous rise of people who have needed care, especially hospital care. And so this is one of the main aspects. The health professions is a priority. And this is a good time to reflect on the value of their work because many health professionals have been tested in this crisis. All of this is very important. Now, on employment, I think there is an aspect which is particularly important.
I think that one of our solutions to face this employment crisis, which goes at the same time as we have a lot of transformations in many sectors through especially the digitalization, and I would even say an acceleration in many sectors of digitalization, remains the skills issue. I think, and this is part also when we talk about the recovery, how can we create jobs and how can we bring people back into a job? I think the skilling and the reskilling of people is extremely important. So this has to be part of the policies at the level of the member states, but also at the level of the European Union. And we will come out in the forthcoming weeks with a new skills agenda showing how we can better tackle the skills deficits, because especially in the digital context, we have a lot of vacancies which are not taken up because we are lacking the right skills among the people. So this is a very important issue. But also the greening of our economy, which will be part of our recovery strategy, needs reskilling a lot of people. There are a lot of opportunities in the green economy, but we have to make sure that indeed the young people and also those who may lose their jobs in the more traditional sectors, that they get the skills in order to be able to work in this new green economy. And about young people, skills is essential. And probably there's a need also for a lot of young people to be reskilled or upskilled, or those who do not have any skills, the needs, they will be the first victims of this crisis. And I want to insist a lot on apprenticeship. The Commission has always been very strongly behind vocational training. And we have to make sure that vocational training will not be finally the loser of this crisis, because SMEs are very much hurt, very much affected by this crisis. So really we have to support SMEs to take as many apprentices as possible. Otherwise, again, we risk to have a lost generation. Resilient societies and economies hinge on resilient social protection systems. I have already said that. Social protection systems must be swiftly adapted to provide adequate support to all, in particular the most vulnerable. Access to social services and essential services should also be ensured. That's also one of the principles of the pillar of social rights. Our recommendations today contribute to a coordinated, fair and sustainable exit and recovery. They are in line with the President's fundamental objective to create an economy that works for people. And I think this is a moment of truth for this economy that should work for people. The Commission is fully committed to supporting Member States in this substantial effort on the ground, including through the EU budget and the recovery plan. The role of social partners is also very imperative. A last word on the issue Commissioner Gentiloni mentioned. Well, this is the rule of law. It's obvious that European directives which have been transposed in national legislation cannot just be skipped or switched off. This is an obligation to respect European directives. Otherwise, we would finally undermine the European legal system. So this is something which is also which has also been to be seen in the context of fairness and of fair competition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So we are now ready to take your questions. I would just like to remind everyone that we would like to focus the press conference today on the European semester package. So please, if you have questions which are unrelated, unraise your hands. Let's see if we have time to take them at the end. So please focus your questions on the package. The first person I see is David Carretta from Radio Radicale. David, the floor is yours.